It wasn't even 6 months ago on this channel I expressed in my review for Dungeon Travelers that I generally have a distaste for first-person dungeon crawlers. Yet here we are again with Mary's Skelter Nightmares. So you might be wondering how I feel about that. Well, if my Darren Aronofsky levels of symbolism are over your head, don't worry, it's all a cheap pun and I'll explain it by the end, so let's get going. Tarks Gauntlet. Mary's Skelter Nightmares is a first-person dungeon crawler developed and published by Compile Heart and Idea Factory, released in October 2016 in Japan and the rest of the world in September of 2017 for the PlayStation Vita and supports compatibility with the PlayStation TV. At the onset of the game, our main characters Jack and Alice are locked in a cell in a rather hellish scene. The entirety of the world in this game is actually a prison of sorts. Some might say it's actually a prison planet. Some might say there's actually something in the water in this world. Some might say
they turned the friggin' frogs gay! Serious crap!
Oh boy. That's a joke. That's the joke! Many locations are based on different types of horror and fairy tale settings, and often blend the two. In line with the fairy tale setting, all of your main characters are named after fairy tale characters as well. Speaking of which, after spending a brief period of time in the prison cell, Jack and Alice are rescued by a new character named Red Riding Hood. Red Riding Hood takes them back to the central hub area of the game known as the Dawn. The Dawn is a small organization operating from a seemingly safe area among these many prison dungeons. Here, Jack and Alice meet many new people who tell them of their quest to escape the prison. The escape plan involves going from dungeon to dungeon and destroying the core of each one. It stands to note here that every dungeon you venture through is actually a living organism using mimicry, and the core is more or less its heart. Each time a core is destroyed, the central prison tower grows higher. Growing the central tower high enough, it's believed the members of the Dawn can simply climb the tower and escape. However, this task cannot be performed by just anybody. These dungeons are overrun with enemies referred to as Marchins. Endlessly wandering the corridors as well is a near-invincible enemy known as a nightmare. To defeat a nightmare, the core of the dungeon must first be destroyed, but the core is protected by a guardian who acts sort of like a boss before the real boss in each dungeon. To stand any sort of fighting chance, one must possess special powers and the ability to wield special weapons. In comes our Blood Maidens. Our female cast of fighters, all named after fairy tale girls, are all Blood Maidens and will be our only true offensive units during combat. So let's get into how combat works. In many ways, this is a basic first-person dungeon crawler. There's nothing particularly new or interesting about your equipment menu or your stats, so we're just gonna skip over that. Skills are created with skill points which are gathered by leveling up. The skills you can choose from are based on the current job your character has, with each character having about 5 jobs on average. Getting a new job does not remove the skills you learned with your last one, so don't be too afraid to try new jobs. At the very least, check some of them out just to see the costumes. Most skills are active and will require SP to cast in combat. You can bring 5 girls into battle at once, and any additional unused character can be set to one of your main girls to act as a support unit, occasionally piggybacking off your attacks to deal additional damage, stun, or steal from the enemies, among other abilities. For the most part, this all sounds pretty standard. But what I think sets this apart from the other first-person dungeon crawlers I played is the blood gauge. Located here beneath the HP and SP meters is the blood gauge. Gradually, as you deal and receive damage, this gauge will fill. When the gauge is full, you will enter Massacre Mode. Massacre Mode unlocks new skills and grants character buffs for a brief period of time. But if you're not careful, this can easily backfire on you. Not all blood you fill the gauge with is good. Much of it will be tainted, and if you fill the meter with tainted blood, you will enter Blood Skelter Mode. Blood Skelter Mode gives massive buffs to the girls, but sends them into a crazed and frenzied state, where they attack literally at random. While it seems attractive to let them enter Blood Skelter and go ham, they can go ham on your own team and end you very quickly. It's not something you want to gamble with, so try to keep it in check. But how do you keep it in check? Well, that's where Jack comes in. Jack, being the only male on the team, can't really be a Blood Maiden, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a place in battle. Jack is unique wherein his blood has a balancing or otherwise purifying effect on the Blood Maidens, Any Blood Maiden in Blood Skelter will require Jack to use his weapon, the Mary Gun, to purge their disease. Without Jack to balance out a Blood Maiden in Blood Skelter, the Blood Maidens are destined to die, making Jack an integral member in the Dawn's escape plan. But of course Jack doesn't have an infinite supply of blood, so managing when to use blood, when to risk a maiden going into Blood Skelter, and when to create new blood becomes a massive part of strategy in battle, and makes battle so much more fun than what I'm used to in first-person dungeon crawlers. But the things Mary Skelter Nightmares does right by me doesn't end there. In previous first-person dungeon crawlers, I tended to feel the dungeons overstayed their welcome, that the grind was too forced by limitations. Let's take another game I reviewed on here. While a borderline masterpiece in terms of battle mechanics, Dungeon Travelers 2 had a lot of things I felt dragged down exploration. From low item limits to one-way doors to only being able to carry 2 side quests at a time and so on, I found too many things in the game were forcing me to replay dungeon areas or leave the dungeon and take it on all over again just to get the most out of an adventure. Thankfully, Mary Skelter avoids all of these pitfalls and adds even more benefits on top. From what I can tell, there is no limit on how many side quests you can be holding. The item limit is 99 unique items, which you will fill, but not so often it becomes an annoyance. There are no annoying mechanics that force you to replay areas, and holes just cause you damage, rather than putting you to another floor you've already played. The adventure, as well as the story and the mystery of the Dawn, the religions in the game, and the jails you navigate all unfold at a good pace. One thing I tended to find games in this genre were rather bad at was their total lack of creativity, with some being so bad as to offer nothing more in dungeons than 90-degree turns. Mary Skelter Nightmares not only mixes it up with inspired dungeon designs and inspired 3D modeled enemies that breathe life into combat, as opposed to the 2D cereal box mascots and waifus of other games, but it also mixes in puzzles, challenges, and obstacles, as well as ongoing passive goals. Simple things like exploring and finding a chain to tightrope across and keep your balance keeps exploration alive and intriguing. In the top right corner here, you'll see 3 symbols. These symbols indicate goals that when achieved will reward the player. For instance, one goal is simply to spread enough of the enemy's blood across the dungeon. When you achieve this, a roulette will appear. Try your luck to stop it where you want and you'll be rewarded. One of the coolest rewards I've seen here actually adds new floors to the dungeon you are in. This makes it so that if you have to grind, you don't actually have to feel like the adventure stopped. Having a new floor to kill enemies on and to find new treasure is so much more fun than walking in tight circles until a battle starts. Furthermore, each new character you get comes with a special ability. Some are able to teleport to access new areas. Some others can drop portals so you can save or teleport to the Dawn at any time. Others can shoot far-off objects, some can generate a shield, and some can even destroy walls with massive bombs. All of these things and more can be used actively while exploring, and my god, it just made this game feel so much better than I was expecting, as somebody who tends to not be the biggest fan of this genre. I think it's safe to say I am a fan of Mary Skelter Nightmares. But the coolest thing I've hardly even touched on yet. So let's talk about the nightmares. I said earlier they relentlessly stalk you, and I wasn't lying. I never felt tension or fear in a first-person dungeon crawler before, but I felt it in this. Before you destroy the core of a dungeon, these nightmares are basically invincible. If they find you, they will chase you relentlessly until you can get out of their detection range. When this happens on normal difficulty, you lose access to your map and the stage goes dark. Trying to make it a safe distance from the nightmare in these conditions is tough, and these things are legitimately freaky to look at, especially when they come barreling after you. I've seen many people complain that when they get pinned to a dead end by a nightmare, they just resign themselves and accept the game over, but I wouldn't recommend that. Just because you can't kill the nightmare doesn't mean you can't defeat them. If you are pinned, you can initiate combat with the nightmare. If you can do enough damage to break a piece of the nightmare's body, you can knock him back and run past him. Also, if you thought the vanilla nightmare was gross, wait until you see what they look like under all the pieces you can break off. These guys are tense, intimidating, and really tough, but my god, they are so fun and they add so much to this game that this catapults Mary Skelter Nightmares to possibly being one of the best, if not the best, first-person dungeon crawler I've ever played. But again, as somebody who's not the biggest fan of the genre, my taste is going to be just a little bit different than the average person's. On a couple other notes before I end this review, while most of the game looks pretty good, there are occasional graphic issues, unpatched seams and the likes. It's rather rough around the edges, but nothing too hard to look past. The music was outstanding. If you have no intent on playing the game, at least give the OST a check. The runtime of the game will vary greatly depending on difficulty. I started on standard, but did start to feel a little bit of a grind tedium halfway through and put it down to easy. Yeah, okay, I get it. I'm a bitch. I put a game on easy halfway through.
Dabbing on them haters.
While I found the difficulties didn't require much extra in the way of strategy, they required a hell of a lot more in terms of grinding. Here's a full battle of me switching back to normal close to the end of the game. Don't do that. You can always go down in difficulty, but going up is not as easy. With my game being half on easy and half on normal, it took me 38 hours to complete. So anywhere between 30 and 50 hours is probably a reasonable estimate. The game does have a fast forward for battle, which does ease grind a little bit, and if you have to revisit an old dungeon, you can take advantage of the auto battle as well. If the enemies are anywhere close to your level though, you might not want to touch auto battle. Often in JRPGs, late game characters tend to struggle to actually get well fleshed out. Thankfully, this isn't the case here. In fact, some of the late game characters bring the most to the story. A welcome surprise for me. The pace overall was great and the mystery of the story as well was very intriguing. The end even incorporated a Danganronpa-esque moment where you have to put together a whole bunch of clues you collected throughout the game to discover the game's biggest plot twist. Really great stuff. In the central hub of the game, there is a mini game of sorts. I guess it would make sense to call this a rubbing game, where you can purge the girls of their toxicity levels by rubbing the bloody spots of their skin. In this, you can also rub off their clothes, much like using a pencil eraser. This is mainly for buffs and can be ignored entirely if you're not into this sort of thing. But special thanks to Idea Factory for releasing this completely uncensored in these trying times. While I'm guessing based on its marketing the game was definitely meant as a fan service game, this is the only area where it seems incredibly obvious. Otherwise, there is some risque costumes and special cutscenes you get from maxing out character relationships, but that's about it. And yes, there are character relationships. At the dawn, you can give these girls gifts to raise relationship levels. This is actually pretty cool simply because giving them things like new wallpaper will actually change the wallpaper in the room they are staying in. Many other games just wouldn't bother with this minute detail. When a relationship level maxes out, these unlock additional cutscenes and endings, but so far as I could tell, that's all they add. This won't affect battle at all, and can be ignored if desired. The game is voiced in English, and I think the voice actor's done a great job, but it's not completely voiced, so don't expect to be too lazy.
Huh? You don't know what it is? It's Marchin' Blood. Marchin' Blood? This is Marchin' Blood?
And lastly, don't get the bad ending. I got it and had to go back, and let me tell you, it was the most unfulfilling bad ending I ever got. So, how did I feel about Mary Skelter Nightmares? This game's a treat. That's all I'm gonna say about Mary Skelter Nightmares, guys. I think it was truly an awesome game, and if you got it and played it, let me know how you felt. This has got pretty mixed reviews, so I'd definitely love to hear how you guys feel out there. You know the deal, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching.